I want to thank you. This is a nice turnout. With that bad storm yesterday, I was so afraid that the Parks and Rec was going to call and say, sorry, your work is not for naught because you don't get the room. Because we were supposed to have a walkthrough yesterday and we got a phone call and said, no one's using that room. It's for storm, the storm rescue and all that. They were using this room as their headquarters. But we're happy that so many of you came. This is like a once-in-a-lifetime presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about Mary. I think you're going to be amazed at her history and what she found out. And after the program, you're more than welcome to come up here, look at her stuff, and we will have time for questions after her presentation. So, if you do have questions, write them down or think about them, and I know Mary will gracefully answer whatever you have. Mary Jefferson is the great-great-granddaughter of Thomas Eston Hemings Jefferson. Eston was the youngest of the 7 children of the enslaved woman Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd president of the United States. In 1998, a DNA study revealed that Mary's first cousin, John Jefferson, had the Y chromosome of the Thomas Jefferson men. Suddenly, Mary and her 2 sons were on flights to Chicago to appear on the Oprah show, and the picture over here shows all the descendants that were asked to come on the Oprah. And there is a YouTube of that episode of which Mary is on, and she can talk about it and maybe give you it, but some of us have seen that YouTube video, and it is amazing. So, I'll let you know that. The controversy over Sally Hemings' relationship with Thomas originally arose in 1802 during Jefferson's first presidential term. In the more than 2 centuries since, the controversy has continued as new documents, oral histories, and scientific discoveries have added to the research. Mary was featured on the Oprah show and was invited to the White House for a select group of Thomas Jefferson's descendants. She has spoken before numerous community organizations, colleges, and universities, and events at Monticello. So please, let's welcome our presenter, Mary Jefferson.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for knowing that you're not going to melt if it rains. Takes some courage. I grew up outside Chicago, and rain is like, nothing to us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a life. Before I get into my talk, I want to elaborate a little bit on AAUW. AAUW is near and dear to my heart. I've been a member since I was 24, so that's before my son was born. I've been in different branches from Illinois to Southern California and here. And the one thing to really know about AAUW is if AAUW does a fundraiser, the fundraiser is not going to treat us to lunch or to some exotic trip or whatever. Our money goes directly from one hand at the fundraiser into another hand of a girl or a woman to provide some help for them with their education or whatever. So we have interest groups, we have lots of social groups, but those are self-funded. We do not fundraise for those. So, AAUW has been a very solid financial organization. We are very frugal with our money, and we just put it where we want it to be, which is to help girls and women. So, if you need help, any elaboration on that, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. But it's been my lifeblood, so I'm glad you're here. Happy Women's History Month. And there's an organization called the National Women's History Museum that is fundraising for a museum for women. Now, women, we are half of the population, and there is no museum in Washington, D.C. for us. So this organization, National Women's History Museum, has been working for years, and they are going to have an exhibit open in Martin Luther King Jr. Museum building. They're giving them a whole floor. So that will be opening up this year. So there is hope there. My birth name is Mary Esther Jefferson. I am a great-great-great-granddaughter of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Sally Hemings was an enslaved woman who worked at Monticello, which is Jefferson's house. Today, I'll tell you about how history got personal for me. My mom was, my mom and dad both grew up outside of Chicago. My mom was in Cicero, which is a blue-collar Italian community on the west side. My mom had 3.5 years of high school. She had to quit high school because she had to work to support the family. My dad grew up in Evanston, Illinois. White, wealthy, white-collar businessman. My grandfather was an attorney for the railroad. And so they met. And my mom was the one from the wrong side of the tracks. If my mom's family had known any of the blood of my dad, she would not have been allowed to date him, much less marry him, because of the one-drop rule of 1 drop of black blood makes you black. They had a good marriage, and except it ended in 1953. My dad had a ruptured aorta and died, and I was 6 years old. So suddenly I had no father. I did know my East Coast Jefferson family because we didn't have money to go traveling anywhere, so I never got to know them. When I was in junior high, my first cousin Julia called from Maryland, talked to my mom and said she thought we might be related to Thomas Jefferson. And so I went into my school, my middle school the next day and said to my social studies teacher, hey, I'm a descendant of Thomas Jefferson. He said, well, you can't be, because he had no male heirs who carried his name. So I thought, okay, and I didn't know my cousins on the East Coast, and I thought, well, maybe they're the social climbing kind of name dropper kind of people, and I just kind of wrote that off. Fall of 19, well, I went on, in 1997, I turned 50, and a friend turned 50, and we decided we were going to do more than just go out to lunch. So we planned a 3-week East Coast trip, and Monticello was on our itinerary. And my cousin Julia told me that I might not want to say anything about Sally Hemings at Monticello because they weren't real thrilled about that discussion. And when I got there, I thought, well, it took me 50 years to get here, and it may take a long time for me to get back. So I opened my mouth. And the lady who was the docent for the home tour, said, yeah, and went on with her talk. And then the garden lady did the same, yeah. And, but the one was for Mulberry Row, the slave area where they lived and worked. She said, you have to come with me. And so she took me and my friend Suzanne over to the historian building. And they had been looking for someone in the Eston line, and I walked in. So they got the connecting information, and which was instrumental when Dr. Eugene Foster was going to do the DNA test. So they had contact people from my line. So women and men, it pays to open your mouth. Okay? You never know. So they were going to do the Y chromosome. My son is here with his partner, Bethany, and their new little baby. So that is my grandbaby number 8. He was born January 2nd. So he is the specially honored guest today. Now, way back when I had my boys, we put Jefferson as their middle name, and at that time it was in honor of my dad, not in honor of Thomas Jefferson, because I didn't really know anything about any of that. Then they were going to do the Y chromosome. They sent the data with the information, whatever, to the Netherlands and to England for processing. And then U.S. News and World Report called and left a message on my answering machine for me to call them. And I was teaching, came home from work, and this was on there, so I called them, thinking, do they want to sell a subscription or what? Well, they wanted to take a picture of my sons and me, because the results were coming out soon on the DNA. So Colby was up in the hills above Santa Barbara, Justin was at UC San Diego, and so, you know, you can imagine how that was, getting them together to go to Diamond Bar, California, to get this photo taken. So we had our picture taken. And I thought, well, you know, when it's a slow news day, they'll put it in. If it's not a slow news day, it won't be in. I wasn't telling anybody about it particularly. When I saw the magazine at the store, lo and behold, it was the cover article. Wow. And I looked inside, and there I am with my boys. Wow. And there is my family tree and all this stuff. And so I thought, wow, this is cool. I thought, you know, I'm finding out about my dad's heritage. Well, I was kind of naive and thought that only historians and family members would care. But suddenly the world seemed to care. And my answering machine was full with all kinds of people who want to interview me or whatever. And here's one from China, and I answered their questions online, so they could write it in English, and then I answered, and then this is what came out. I cannot read it to you. But I was a reading specialist at that point, and so when all this happened, I get a call from the secretary telling me the Oprah people are on the line. Okay, so then I find out in a couple days we're going to be going to the Oprah show, and you know, bless my AAUW friends, one of my dear friends, Dana, I told her about it, and she said, well, what are you going to wear? So she took me shopping. You know, and that's, AAUW members are invaluable. So, because I didn't even think of what I was going to wear. I was just kind of in shock. Anyway, so we got to Chicago, and the weather was typical for Chicago, and it was November, end of October, and it was windy, it was humid, it was gray, it was miserable, and my hair explodes when it gets humidity. So I was there, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you know, what's going to happen? So we went to the show. We got a tour of Oprah Studios, Harpo Productions, and then we were escorted into our little green room. They had all this food there, but I don't think any of us ate anything. We were too nervous, but they had quite a spread for us. I had brought a book that I had just finished reading. It was Annette Gordon Reed's book, Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, An American Controversy. I'd heard she might be there, so I grabbed the book and threw it in my bag when I packed. And while I was getting my hair done and my makeup done, and this woman doing my makeup, she's mixing the foundation in her hand to blend to match my skin. I mean, we're talking different world. So she was doing my makeup, and Annette comes in to sign my book, because I told the Oprah people I wanted her to sign the book. So she signed the book. I can't look at her, I don't even know what she looks like, because she's signing it and she goes on her way. And then after the makeup people and the hair people were done with me, I looked in the mirror and I thought, oh my gosh, it was like a miracle, you know. And I still say I should have died that day, because I have never looked so good. You know, those people were amazing. You know how you can tell how management is by how you are treated in a store or a restaurant or whatever. Same with the Oprah show. I had been to a lot of shows because my friends and I didn't have a lot of money outside LA, but we could go to free TV shows all the time. But we all saw the tension and the knots and the, you know, angst before tapings would start. Not at Oprah. Everybody's relaxed, everybody's chilled. This guy comes and he picks a tissue I had up on the floor under my seat, and he said, I need that, and he said, I'll just get you a new one. It was like, whatever, they were just so, it was just a wonderful experience. The show went really fast, and all of a sudden it's over. The people in our audience did not get a car. They got a copy of U.S. News and World Report. Make their day. After the show, Julia and my cousin Julia and I wanted to get something from the Oprah store. Well, then we were told it was closed. We said, and then the Oprah people, who are like kind of everywhere in the walls, but they come out, and said, well, what did you want? And we told them what we wanted. And they sent it to us free of charge with another thank you note. It got to me before I got home. Wow. It was amazing. More Oprah magic. So we're in the hallway. We're meeting people we have not known of before. And we're all excited. There's our picture here. And we want to have lunch together at the good old Omni Suites Hotel. And but one couple said, well, our flight is too soon, we're going to have to miss lunch. Well, one of the Oprah people who's hanging out there said, well, we'll just change your flight. It's like, oh, okay. It's a whole different world. So we had a wonderful luncheon. We were in a walnut paneled room. Our server was very dignified and very professional and trying to do a perfect job, but we were a new family. We were getting to know each other, and we were typical of any kind of family gathering. It was a little chaotic. So we ordered our food, and then we switched seats to sit over here and talk to this person and that person, and our poor server came with our dishes, and we weren't in the right places. And I don't know if he had to take a day off after that, but it really bothered him. But we had a wonderful, wonderful time. When I got home from Chicago, CNN wanted me to call them, so I called CNN. So here's my first day back in my reading lab after being gone 5 days. And CNN is going to come and videotape my last reading group, which is my most squirrely little group, and then follow me home and film me watching the Oprah show that we were on, and then do an interview. And so this all happens, and somehow, there's no stress involved, right? I have to have my classroom looking good. I have to have my house looking good. I have to somehow organize my stuff to look presentable. And it all kind of fell into place. And it was a lot of fun. Some of my reading lab students had some interesting little reactions. The little murmurs you hear are from Jerome Jefferson Boggs. He is my 8th and latest grandbaby. And so he's our honored guest here. Yeah. So, but anyway, so some of my students, I had a student named Thomas, and he was fresh from Thailand, knew very little English, had one of those names that goes on forever. But Thomas got the gist of this whole thing. And he was interviewed by one of the journalists that came to my classroom. And they quoted him in the newspaper. And he was all excited. And he said, well, he wanted to be related to Thomas Jefferson. And he wanted to change his last name to Jefferson so he could be Thomas Jefferson. And so I got several copies of the newspaper and highlighted what his part was on there for his parents. And that was really exciting. Some of my other students were filmed and then were on TV that night, different nights. And they wrote about, of course, I used this as an experience for them to write about what happened to them and what happened at their houses when they watched themselves. And so they wrote about that. And one of the ones I read about while I was getting ready for this talk was a little girl named Gina. And she said she wanted to be related to the Spice Girls. So I thought that was cute, fresh. you know. One of the people descended from Thomas and his wife Martha invited the Hemmings descendants to their family association that next May. Now they had this meeting the second weekend in May every year, and from what I was told, it was usually boring and poorly attended. This organization was created really to take care of the cemetery, to make sure it was, kept clean and all that. And so suddenly, Lucian Truscott, who was on Oprah with us, he invited the Hemmings family to come to this family organization. So we went, and we got off the shuttle, and it was thick with media, just thick, with one interview after another, and questions and local and whatever else. And then at one time they announced that they wanted to take a picture. So would all the descendants of Thomas Jefferson go on the steps to have their picture taken? Well, we thought, okay, well, let's do this, So here we are. And I have a lot of things I didn't know about before this all happened. And one of the things I didn't know about how ugly and pervasive racism is in this country. Because of the way I look, no one would dump on me. And so found out about how bad the hate is. So those of you who have been experiencing that in your life, my heart goes out to you, because it's ugly and it's not going away. Much tourists make. But anyway, I'll show you this picture.
Wow.
Okay, so this is the picture that they took. And later on afterwards, you can come up and look, and if you see people who have grumpy faces, those are the ones on Martha's side, okay? Those of us who are smiling, that's Hemming's side. And so you'll see people with different looks. This picture went around the world. It was in newspapers all over the place. This is a picture of my sons, Colby and Justin at Monticello. And over here, this is a picture of my dad at Monticello. Now, I don't know the background of that picture. I had a box of pictures. My mom had marked Jefferson pictures. So I looked through them, and I was trying to identify people with my cousin. And then after I looked at them again, I thought, that's Monticello. And so I don't know who took the picture. What did my dad know or not know? My family tree in the Jefferson side has lots of dead ends of people who did not have children. Now, I don't know if I come from people who didn't like children, or I don't know if they knew the family history and were afraid that the baby that would be born from them would be the wrong color. And so at the time of the Oprah show, I met descendants of the first child, Thomas Woodson, of Sally and Thomas. And at that point in time, they had 1,400 living descendants.
Wow.
That was from the first child. From the last one, from Eston, which is my line, we had 14 living descendants. So, too many people I can't ask because they're long gone, but, it's very telling. Let's see, the Monticello Association, bless their hearts, said, well, we will think about it, we will research this. Well, it took them 4 years, and we kept going back every year, and the first year that I was there, members of their group were very nice to me and chat with me, and then I happened to mention my connection to Eston, and they would walk away. And I thought, with my naivete, that, oh, maybe they saw someone they wanted to talk to or whatever, you know. Well, that wasn't the case. Once they knew after that first year who I was, then I got the hate, then I got the ugly, then I got people yelling at me this far from my face. You know, and I'm pretty mild-mannered most of the time. Kindergarten teacher, you know, primary grade teacher, and it just blew me away. But anyway, this group had their own so-called Scholars Commission that was going to do the research and decide if this was true or not. Now, there's those of you who are scientists at all know that when you come up with your science experiment or whatever, you set your hypothesis of what you think is going to happen. And then you go through your discovery and find out what does happen, and then you make your conclusion. Well, the Scholars Commission came up with their conclusion and then fit whatever they wanted to into there to support that conclusion. It's a little backwards. There was a time at the Monticello Association where this group was going to give their report to the press. And they had a room at the hotel where we were staying. And I tried to go into that room to hear what they were saying. And so I go to the door, and there's somebody there who's not in their association. And so he doesn't know me. And I said, well, can I go in? He says, no, it's only press. I said, well, why can't I go in? He said, you just can't. I said, are you KKK? He nodded. He didn't know who I was, otherwise he would have lied. But yeah, so that was their connection, and that was how their report came. And at the end of 4 years, they decided on 3 things. Number 1, they would not let us be part of their association, period. Number 2, they would not have anything to do with any organization we would ever create. And number 3, which is the real corker, they said that they would oppose us to be buried anywhere at Monticello, and this is a quote, because in time the graves would blend. Okay? This is how insidious it was. Now, they didn't know that I recorded that. I have, you know, a big black leather bag I take around to things like this. I could shove all stuff in it. And I had a cassette tape recorder in there with the microphone kind of sticking out the top. And so I have it all recorded for posterity. We were invited to the White House just prior to 9/11, so that's spring, for Thomas Jefferson's birthday. I guess President George W. might have needed some of the African American votes, so he invited us. And the thing that was fun, you know, is that in the invitation to the White House, not everyone was invited. And the invitation list was from the historians at Monticello. So they had Hemming's descendants and Martha's descendants. And there were some key Martha people who were not invited to this special event. So I thought that was fun. Made my day. We were invited on Tuesday morning to be at the White House Thursday at 1 o'clock. Okay, so we're going through another craziness of getting flights and getting my sons together. And, you know, Colby said, this is last minute. Like, you know, I said, are we going to ever be invited to the White House again? You know, so he did come, and I'm glad he was there for this, because it was awkward for all of us to get the flights and get the rooms and everything else. So that was a lot of fun. We got to sit in a lot of different rooms there. They had a reception with lemonade and cookies afterwards. We got to go into a room that has a lot of the First Lady's paintings. That was lovely to sit in there and and President Bush read a proclamation about Thomas Jefferson's birthday, and we had our pictures taken with the president. I have some things I want to tell you. Did you know Jefferson's wife died in 1782, which was is very significant because they were married 10 years. He loved her. When she died, he promised at her bedside not to remarry. And Sally Hemings was one of the ones that was invited to be at the bedside. Jefferson went through several weeks of depression where he didn't talk to anybody. He might go riding maybe with his daughter Martha, but he was isolating himself. He said his wife was torn by him by death. He really, really was heartbroken. So when he got invited to represent the United States in France, he was eager to get out of town. He needed a diversion. So he took his one daughter with him and a few of the enslaved people with him. And then he left two daughters back in Virginia. And then there was, I think it was smallpox that was going through and killed his daughter Lucy, and the family that we were staying with had a Lucy, and both Lucys died. And so Jefferson was panicking that the other one, who was Mary Jefferson, that he, had them come back. There was an enslaved woman he wanted to accompany her on the trip to France, but that enslaved woman happened to be pregnant, so somebody picked Sally to go, and so Sally was not selected to go, but she went. She was 14 at that time. Now, one of the things I want to make sure you have in your brain is that this is before we had high school. So girls at 14, 15, 16 were marriageable, okay? Girls were trained to do their sewing, to do their cooking, and that was what they were destined to do, is take care of the home. And so they were not going to college, they certainly weren't going to high school. They were lucky if they were taught to read and write back in the day. She had 6 pregnancies in 10 years, and she had, like a lot of women at that time, had a lot of terrible reactions after the births. We know, if you've been to any old cemeteries, you can see all the women that have died and the babies that have died because medical care wasn't what it is now. And so he loved his wife, but they kept procreating, and she ended up dying with the complications after her last birth. Sally was a quarter black. So I don't know if you know that, but her mother was half black, half white. Sally and Jefferson's wife, Martha, were half sisters. They had the same father. So my romantic side says, because we've discussed, ad infinitum, was this a love relationship with Sally and Thomas, or was it rape? And there's no way we can know. However, I think if we discount that they could have had a good relationship, we discount their humanity to each other. Since they were half-sisters, his wife and Sally, who knows if there's something genetically that popped up that is familiar to him. An earlobe, a gesture, a chin, who knows? That went beyond words of connection. I don't know. It's all supposition. It could very well be coercion and rape. We have nothing to bank either side on. After Thomas Jefferson died, though, Sally Hemings lived in Charlottesville, and 2 or 3 times a week she would walk 6 miles to Monticello to visit his grave. Now, you'd think if that was a man you hated, would you bother to cross the street to see his grave? No. So there, who knows? Who knows? Unless she wanted to go and spit on it or something. I don't know. So, like I said, we don't really know. The names of all of Sally's kids, and there were 7. You'll read that there are 6. You'll read that there are 4, but there were 7. The names of Sally's kids were each named for a person or a place that was important to Thomas Jefferson. Beverly, 2 of their kids were Beverly and Harriet. Beverly was a man's name in my family line. And Beverly and Harriet were, as you would with your children, they were trained in a skill. They learned a skill that they could sell, that they could do something to earn a living. And Jefferson gave them money and let them leave. They were the only 2 that were not chased after to bring back. They both went into the white world. We don't know where their family line went. It's a big question. So we don't know that at all. The next 2 children were Madison and Eston, and they were freed in Thomas Jefferson's will. With the other ones, Harriet and Beverly, they were allowed to leave when they were 21. So Eston and his wife left Virginia after Sally died, and they went to Ohio. And Madison, his brother, also went to Ohio. But I think, I suppose, that Eston might have not felt quite as comfortable there because you could still be reined back in and be re-enslaved. And so Eston took his family and went up to Madison, Wisconsin. He changed his name. His birth name was Thomas Eston Hemmings. He changed his his registration name in Wisconsin to E.H. Jefferson. So that's how I ended up getting the Jefferson name. And he registered as white. And I have notes not because I will forget these things, but because I can bird walk all day. And I know you have more things to do than be here. So I want to tell you some of the negatives, some of the negatives that happened. Like I said before, I've been yelled at. I have been screamed at with people with bad breath, right here, who are yelling at me for existing, and how dare I. Finding out about how hate is so real and so solid and so pervasive. And some people have said to me, oh, well, when the next generation comes up, they'll be raised differently. No, their parents are raising them exactly the same. So they're learning all the hate from their family and the ones I hang out with. I've seen disgust on some of Martha's descendants' faces. If someone in my group of Hemmings descendants comes up to them and offers to shake their hand, they look at that hand and there is an absolute look of revulsion as if that was full of diarrhea or something. This is how bad these people, it's not like they're trying to be cool and they're just being a little rude. No, they just, are totally grossed out by this whole idea. With people that I've gotten to know, cousins I've gotten to know who are as wonderful people that you would want for your neighbor, you'd want for your friends, you'd want your family to hang out with theirs. It's been incredible. Some of my friends, coworkers and things like that, most were saying, hey, this is really exciting, wow, cool. But some of them, one of them that was a good friend of mine through church, was angry at me because suddenly I was so black. Whatever. Someone else told me I wouldn't be talking about this if I were you.
Wow.
But the positives, the big thing for me was finding out about my dad's family. Since I didn't know his family, I didn't know any of that history, I didn't know my dad, I have vague memories of him, I was, a little kid. So that was the power of all of this for me, was finding out my dad's heritage. Whatever that was. Thomas Jefferson is incidental in it. It was my dad's. I have cousins everywhere. Wonderful, hysterical, funny people. I don't get along with all of them, just like you don't get along with all of your family members. But we have a good time together. And this last June, I went to Monticello. It was an event for descendants of anyone who lived and worked at Monticello. So it was all the slave lines. So there were 400 and some of us. And there were some I hadn't seen in a few years. And so we got reunited, and it was just overwhelming. Whitney Marsalis was one of our guest speakers and musicians. Ava DuVernay was there, Annette Gordon-Reed was there, and a whole bunch of people. I could give you a list, but it's just amazing, stellar people came to talk. I've had a chance to meet other authors and people like Tom Brokaw. It's been amazing. And being in that picture with Oprah and having my arm around her waist, and she's got her arm around my waist, was like, all right, good things are happening. Are there any genealogists here? All right. Bless your hearts. You're doing the family work. Good for you. It's a lot of work, but it really pays off. People do appreciate it. They won't tell you maybe, but it's priceless information that you're getting. So hang in there. But the National Genealogical Society Quarterly, September 2001, did a whole issue on this question and said, yes, the evidence is there, genealogically speaking, to support the conclusion. Now, I've got a couple God stories to close with. I think God has a sense of humor, and things have happened that are too coincidental to be accidental. One of them was my cousin Connie called from LA, and she called and she said, John Works Sr. has passed away. Do you want to go with me to his funeral in Denver and represent the family? And I said, sure. And John Works Sr. had 2 sons, and the 3 of them were not really in line with welcoming us at the beginning. But they did, and the dad, John Sr., and his son David, did end up welcoming us with open arms, and we had a great time with them, dancing at a bar together. It's just fun times together. So I said, we'll go. So I get in the car and go to the airport and go with Connie, and we fly to Denver, we get our rental, we get in the hotel, and Connie's unpacking, and she forgot to bring the information on where the funeral was. So we're in Denver, not a little bitty town. So we're in Denver. The only thing she knows is it's Saint something, and no one's at her house that she can call to get the notes. And so we're at loose ends. We came all this way, and we don't even know where we're going. So we went driving around, and we went to a church, and the parking lot was full. We thought, well, maybe this is it. Well, it was a wedding. Then we went to another church, and the parking lot was full, and we thought, well, let's give this a go. So this is where God comes in, because God had us arrive fashionably late so we could make an entrance. And we go in these doors. There are 2 doors in the back of this building. And I'm thinking, this is the back of the church. We'll just go in and sneak in and sit down. Well, it was an Episcopal church. The priest was talking about John Works Sr. and talking about the Sally Hemings issue. And we walk in, Exhibit A and Exhibit B. Everyone is looking at us, and of course we're mortified, and we kind of sneak into the next pew that's open, and John's son David turns around, and I said, "Where do we sit?" He said, "Right there, that's the family section." So we sat with them. But the other part of the story is that David had a brother named John Works Jr. And John Works Jr. dyes his hair red to be like Thomas Jefferson to this day.
Wow.
And so he has not accepted us. He is very against us. And so here Connie and I come into church and we're sitting with the family. And where is this red-headed guy? He's in the back pew. He's estranged from his family because he couldn't accept this. Really a sad thing. But that was a God story because God timed it perfectly. You know, just like we rehearsed. The second one is kind of funny. I was at one of the Monticello Association meetings, and that Sunday they opened up the cemetery and everybody's in there putting flowers out for their family members and talking and whatever. And we're over, let's say that this is the cemetery. And I'm here with Kelly, who's one of my black cousins, and we're chatting. And there's a group over in the middle of the opposite side who are glaring at them. All of them, 8 different ages, down to the kids. If looks could kill, we would have been dead many times over. But we're there and I said, "Hey Kelly, wouldn't it be cool? I want a reason to go past them, but there's nothing over there for me to go see. The obelisk for Jefferson is over here." So I no sooner had said that to Kelly, this is God having fun. No wind, no storm, beautiful sunny day. And out over here, where I needed it, a big tall tree goes crack, 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 boom. Exactly where I needed it. So Kelly and I could walk past, and we talked really loud about how we were so happy we were descendants of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, and isn't this wonderful? And we're going to be buried here, and saying all this stuff. We're getting glare daggers from these people. But that was a God story. God put that tree, and just out of nowhere, I couldn't believe it. Anyway, there are lots of books up here, lots of materials. You can check things out afterwards. Do any of you have, oh, I wanted to tell you, where is it? Annette Gardner-Reed has written a couple books on the family. And she's kind of like an honorary cousin because she's been in so many things with us that we love her. But this book, The Hemingses of Monticello, she won the Pulitzer for it. She is one of those writers who is brilliant and can write so it is readable. You don't have to dig to find out what she's talking about. She is a beautiful writer, an amazing one. In this book, Jefferson's Children, there are pictures of, a lot of pictures with these tags of all kinds of things. One of the chapters in here is about my sons and me, and our pictures in there. And they couldn't get us together because of life and boys going to school. And so they interviewed us on a phone call because we couldn't all be in one place forever. So these little tabs mark wherever we are. Any questions? Yes?
You implied that Jefferson freed 2 of his children by Sally, but yet it's my understanding he did not free Sally. And his final will did not give her her liberty. Do you not find that concerning?
Well, you know, when everything kind of hit the fan, early 1802, I think, about the press and Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, And he did not respond to anything at all, period, end of discussion. So he did not put that in his will, and we think that that was his strategy to not draw attention to people who would say, aha, we do it all the time. So he did, with his will, let his last two children, Eston and Madison, leave. And he let Sally, that was not in his will, but Martha, his daughter, knew. And so she was freed in essence, but not in paperwork. That was his way of protecting the story. When his wife died, he was so upset, he burned all letters and any portraits of his wife. So we don't have anything. He was a compulsive letter writer. And he had this cool machine that he would write, and it would simultaneously write a copy. So he had copies of all his letters. He loved to write. So all of those letters, you know, are gone. So we don't know really what his wife looked like. Any other questions?
Where's Sally buried? Where's she interred?
That's a good one. They were researching it and trying to figure out what in the world and where in the world. And the place that they think it might be is in Charlottesville, at the Hampton Inn parking lot. Now, you have to think back to cemeteries and what kind of markers they put. If you were an enslaved person, there was not going to be a stone engraved. There was going to be a wooden cross, which, you know, is gone by now. They did find a graveyard on the Monticello property that they have 20 or 30 graves that they have not dug up, but they have researched to see that there are people buried there, and they're calling that the slave yard, the cemetery for the enslaved. And we've had prayer sessions there, and have sung and whatever to honor them. We don't know who they are. We never will know who they are, and so we don't know where Sally is. We don't have any pictures of her. Of course, if you were wealthy, you had an artist paint you at that time. There were no photographs at that point. So we just have descriptions from her son Madison. But yeah. Yes.
I'm wondering, was this a time when if you freed a slave, they had to leave the state? And so that could be one reason he did not free her, because
Right.
she didn't want to leave the state.
Yes.
And he knew she didn't. It's possible.
That's part of it. It really is, because he was well aware of that, and he did that with Eston and Madison being part of his will. That they were. He wrote in there something to the effect that they could stay in Virginia and that they did not have to leave the state. So he was protective of that. When Sally and Thomas first got together was in France. And in France, she was a free woman. And if she had stayed there, she could have been a free woman. And according to Madison, that Jefferson had a talk with Sally and vowed to commit that her children would be freed if she came back to the United States. Yes?
Didn't she also have a brother that was in France with them?
Yes, he was a chef being trained in the French cuisine. Yes.
So what
And
happened to him?
he came back also. But he was one of the ones that were freed. There were other Hemmings members who were freed according to his will. So, yeah. Yes.
You mentioned that Thomas named his children, and who is Eston? I mean, what is that? How is that name significant to Thomas Jefferson?
Well, they're not exactly sure. There is a British birthplace of his paternal ancestor, William Randolph, was in a little area called Eston.
Oh,
Or it could be Thomas Jefferson's favorite cousin, who was Thomas Eston Randolph. And if you look at a lot of these names, you'll see that they have a middle name, and they were called their middle name. They weren't called their first name. Eston was Thomas Eston Hemmings, but he was called Eston. And so that happened in a lot of families, and I think it did, there's a lot of confusion. Those of you who are genealogists know all this, but the names pop up over and over again, and you think of which Martha Jefferson is it? Which one of what era? And it gets to be very confusing. Where now we name children because we like the name, sometimes because it's a family member or a friend, but it isn't as it used to be, where that's what it was all the time. Yeah. Yes.
Do you know what happened to the eldest child, Thomas?
Yeah, Thomas Woodson. That some of the data we've read have said that he died shortly after his birth, but then there is an organization called the Thomas Woodson Family Organization, and they have documentation and oral history that said no, that he looked a lot like Thomas Jefferson, and because of that, he was sent to another family, the Woodson family, and he was enslaved there. And that's where that whole family organization builds it up. Several of Sally and Thomas's kids did look like Thomas Jefferson, and people who came to dinner at Monticello would comment on how much they would look like him. And one was even confused that he was Thomas Jefferson. It was at dusk, and the sun was standing there, and someone thought it was Thomas Jefferson. So, it was very visible. But as I said, Thomas Jefferson never replied to any of those queries. He just let it die a natural death. It was against the law, even though it was popular and common. And another thing was, some of the documentation that Martha's family has said is that, she was a whore, and there were all kinds of men it could have been. Well, in reality, there are gentlemen's agreements. And gentlemen's agreements mean that if Thomas Jefferson has selected this enslaved woman to be his concubine, all of the rest of the men would respect that and the honor of the male, whatever. And in with the DNA, it was also suggested that it was one of Thomas Jefferson's nephews had fathered her children, and the DNA rejected that. The DNA is not a perfect thing in that in the life of a family, we all know family members who get pregnant, and then the grandmother actually raises the child as her own. And everyone is told that that's her child. We know all kinds of things with rape and incest that happen, and families will accept a child and call them a different connection than they are. And we know that we are human, and human beings do err and stray. And so to find male to male to male to male Y chromosome, someone living now that's a straight male line from Jefferson or from wherever, that if somebody in that line was born with different DNA from a different line because of some other family, something, it wouldn't be. So it doesn't exclude, but it confirmed with my cousin John. Yes.
Thank you for coming and talking.
Oh, my pleasure.
Such a delight. I'm curious about, in the genealogy here, about the living descendant of Field Jefferson, who gave the blood for DNA testing. Where does Field Jefferson fall in this lineage?
Yeah, his name is John Field Jefferson, and that's my first cousin, John. He's under Julia. Yeah.
Got it, thank you.
Did he acknowledge any of these as his children, or they were?
He did and he didn't. He did not, in everything I've read from, that Madison has written, that he did, they learned to play violin like he did. They, and he did enjoy that, but he was not as attentive as he was with his own children from Martha. So that, caused some pain with Sally's kids. But that had to be so that nobody watching could connect it. Yeah, there was a lot at stake. And, yeah, it's another little family burial story, and hopefully we will find out in the next world.
I've written on
What-
the jumbo and it never explained this part.
Well,
Some years ago, but
yeah, well, they, now they have the they have the Hemmings exhibit. And that is part of it, and it's under, near where the kitchens are, underneath. If you've been to Monticello, they have these kind of walkways out, and then underneath, if you go on the other side, they open up, and that's where the kitchens were. On the other side, that's where the stables were. And because Jefferson wanted to be able to look out and see plants and greenery and not see people working, So that was his way of doing that. And he had he invented a little, what was it? Here, I'm having a senior moment. Dumbwaiter. He had a dumbwaiter he invented, and it went down to the downstairs part of the home where the kitchens were and the wine cellar and all that stuff. And so they would load up this dumbwaiter, and then it would bring things up to the dining room. And there were times when he wanted to have a dinner and not have any servants up there. And so they could just do that. He'd send the empty bottle and get a new one, come up. And so that was his way of kind of, and who knows what all was going on with, some of these servants looking like him. It's kind of like, it's hard to miss. and we've got our little guy here, and babies are like I think like a bud, a flower bud. And they're born, and we kind of have an idea of who they are, but a petal at a time, they open up and reveal things from this side of the family, things from that side of the family, things that we didn't know from a side a couple generations ago. It's interesting what we'll find out about genetics, actually, that it has to do with the way you walk and the way you talk and the way you gesture, and some of the studies on identical twins who've been separated at birth, and you see how they name their children the same names, and it's bizarre. But so, hard to know. But I thank you all for coming, and feel free to come on up and look at the pictures and